Okay, so this video is going to go over the anatomy that we're expecting you to know and identify for your upcoming exam 4, which is going to be partly on this urinary system. So you can see I have a few things in front of me that we're going to go over. So we're going to go over this kidney model, as well as sort of understanding the rough location of everything in that abdominal cavity. And then we're also going to talk about this nephron unit, so that functional unit of the urinary system. And you can see that there are a couple different types of nephrons there that we'll talk about. And then you can also see over here we have a number of dissected out kidneys. So these two kidneys down here, we're going to have pig kidneys. And up here is going to be a sheep kidney. So we're going to look at some of the different structures that we can see across all three of these kidneys. And we're also going to use this model to help us identify those components as well. So what we're actually going to do is start with this model. So we're going to start from this basic model and understand what we're going to try to look for in the actual real specimens. All right, so when we're tracing the flow of urine formation, so before we get here, we'll actually mention, right, that this large structure right here that's going all the way down between from this cortical layer all the way to that medullary layer of the kidney, this is all a big collecting duct right here. And a lot of those collecting ducts all bundled together are going to make up these renal pyramids, which are number 29. All right, so these are all the pyramids of the kidney. And so we have urine flowing down these collecting ducts, and they're draining into this papilla, which is kind of an extension of that renal pyramid. All right, and we can see before we get too far along here, we can see these other renal pyramids that are all around the kidney. And as urine is flowing through the collecting ducts of these pyramids, going through and then into this papilla region, the urine's then going to flow into these minor calyxes. So each one of these little projections here is a minor calyx. So you can kind of think about this as kind of a tree with a branching pattern. So here's a minor calyx, here's another one, and this is another. And these are receiving urine that's flowing out from the pyramid and papilla region. And all that urine is being funneled down into this larger chamber, which is where all of these minor calyxes converge on what we call a major calyx. So this is a major calyx. All right, you can see some more of these minor calyces that are draining out right here. And those are all draining into a major calyx, and there are multiple major calyxes. And those will actually drain all the way down into what we call the renal pelvis, which is going to be labeled as number 24 right here. And then as urine kind of piles up and builds up in this pelvic region of the kidney, the renal pelvis, then it's going to flow through the ureter, which is labeled as number 3, and then of course that's going to flow all the way down to the bladder. So again, we can kind of trace the flow of urine as it's passing through the collecting ducts, it's draining through the pyramids and then the papilla into these minor calyces and then the major calyx. And then that's going to send urine down into this renal pelvis and then into and through this ureter. All right, some other things to point out is you can see the space. So there's some space occasionally between two pyramids, and these are called renal columns. So you can see this is another region, which is a renal column. And another thing that we can point out in this diagram is going to be the medulla versus the cortex of a kidney. So just like a lot of other organs we looked at, the cortex is going to be this outermost layer, so this outer portion. All right, and then all of this in the inner region here, this is all going to be the medulla. So you can see the medulla of the kidney is going to be much larger than this cortex or this cortical region. And remember, like we showed you earlier on the nephron, each of these individual lines is a collecting duct system. So if we go back over to the nephron quick, again, we can see this collecting duct that travels down, and this top layer is the cortex, and it goes downwards into this medulla. All right, so this is traveling down towards the central component of the kidney. All right, and then we can also see things like the renal artery and the renal vein that are leading, the renal artery, of course, feeding blood towards the kidney, and then the renal vein, which is leaving the kidney. And remember, this renal vein is going to go to the inferior vena cava, which will then go upwards towards the right atrium. All right, now to kind of course, put this into context, I think a lot of you understand where the kidneys are located. So what we're looking at here is the abdominal region. And of course, we have the right and the left kidney over here. And we can see the ureters that are leaving each kidney going down towards the bladder, which is number 4. So here's our bladder. And of course, the bladder is going to fill up with urine, it will stretch, and then as we'll find out later in lecture class, this stretching signal is going to initiate a number of different type of reflexes and pathways. And if there is urination, then the urine that's building up in here is going to go out through the urethra, which is right here. All right, so let's go to the actual real kidneys. We can identify all the same components that we just looked at over here in the kidney and find them on these real kidneys. All right, so what you're looking at, of course, is this is a pig kidney, and this is stained for the blood vessels, so we can see arteries in red, veins are going to be in blue. And then over here, this one is a little bit of an older specimen, but it's still kind of nice because this actually has a third stain, which is going to be this orange stain right here. All right, so this pig kidney, all right, basically what we've done, we've cut it right down the middle and folded it open. And you can see pretty clearly the cortex layer. So you can see all those little cortical blood vessels that are branching out. And what we can also see are all these pyramids of the pig kidney. So you can see, for example, what I'm circling here. This is a pyramid. Right, here's another pyramid and another one. And then we have another pyramid that's down here. All right, so these are all pyramids that are going along kind of that boundary between the cortex and then the medulla, which you can see below that. And of course on the other side, it's pretty symmetrical. We can see all these pyramids. All right, so again, here's one pyramid, here's another one, and here's another one down here, and you can see a few more. But remember, if we're tracing the flow of urine, so these pyramids are consisting of a lot of those collecting ducts that are running parallel to each other. And if we can zoom in a little bit, what we can notice is going to be kind of the base of the pyramid is going to be where that papilla is. So the papilla is going to be roughly located there. All right, I'll try to zoom in a little bit. All right. All right, so we have a pyramid, and at the very sort of tip or base of this pyramid, this is going to be the papilla. And then it immediately will drain into a minor calyx, which is just on the other side of that papilla. So we can also look up here again, you can see that there are some pyramids that are located here, so you can see a few of them in the view. And they each have their papilla at the base of that pyramid. And so these are all minor calyxes that are draining from them. And then you can see right here where all of these minor calyxes would flow, this is going to be where we would find a major calyx. And then that major calyx is going to drain urine down this way towards this renal pelvis region. So again, we can see that there's another minor calyx here. We can see another minor calyx here and another one coming from here. So this region would be a major calyx, and then that will drain urine into this renal pelvic region here. And again, in the renal pelvic region, that's where it will send urine out through the ureter, which is actually this structure here. The ureter is still wrapped in a fair amount of fatty tissue. So this right here is all the ureter that's between my fingers. And if you look at it, we can actually see the ureter kind of within that fatty tissue right there. So this will travel down towards the bladder. And pretty well you can see the renal artery that enters, and it will start branching. And then we can't see the renal vein very well, but we can certainly see a lot of the very first branches coming off of that renal vein. And we are going to go over this in lecture. So later on in lecture, for your exam 4, we're going to talk about the branching patterns. So we're going to talk about the arteries that enter the kidney. We're going to talk about how they branch between the pyramids, and then how they branch and wrap around the pyramids. All right, and then we're going to have all these little arteries and veins, of course, that are within the cortex as well. And you can see that there's an abundance, there's a large density of them right at that sort of margin between the cortex and the medulla. So this is really nice to visualize this cortex in the medulla region. And again, a lot of these kidneys are very easy to see. So each one of these units, again, is a pyramid. So we can see the pyramids pretty easily, and then the papilla are going to be at the tips of these pyramids. And then you can see that they are going to have these minor calyces. All right, and we can go, let's go over here again quick to this slightly older kidney. So we can see very similar structures. So again, we can see, for example, here's a pyramid, here's another pyramid, and then we can see a couple pyramids up here as well. Now, the thing that this is illustrating very well, excuse me, is that draining from the pyramids, remember the papilla, they're going to be kind of here at the tips of the pyramid. So here's another papilla right there, and we have a papilla that's going to be in this region. This is really good because you can see the actual minor calyxes. So that's what this orange is kind of highlighting. So this is a minor calyx, this is a minor calyx, and you can see that this is another one over here. They're all kind of funneling towards this more central location, which again is a major calyx. And then everything's getting funneled down to this region, which is that renal pelvis. And so over here is good because again, you can see that here's one minor calyx, there's a couple minor calyxes up here, and another one off to the side. All of these minor calyxes are draining towards this kind of palm, if you will, of the hand, or this branching pattern. This is a major calyx, and the major calyx again is sending everything down towards this renal pelvis. And then this, of course, this is going to be the ureter that's leaving, so the renal pelvis will then drain and funnel urine into that ureter. All right, the sheep kidneys are pretty small, and you can see that these ones aren't really stained for anything in particular. You can still see the pyramids very nicely. So again, here's going to be a pyramid and another one right next to it. And you can also see the papilla at the end of the pyramid. So you can see this is the papilla right here, and here's another one. And over here you can start to kind of see at the bottom some of these minor calyxes that are draining down from those pyramids into the major calyx. And then those are going to be draining down into this renal pelvic region, which is still kind of filled with a large amount of fat right now. And that renal pelvis region, of course, is going to send urine out through the ureter, which is located right here. And this also, of course, the sheep kidney, even though it's not stained, we can very clearly also see the cortex versus the darker medulla. Okay, so let's also kind of move back here to this nephron and talk about this a little bit more. So again, as we'll cover in lecture and in the lab PowerPoint that'll be posted, we're going to go over the structure and the function of all the different components of the nephron. But just a quick recap, you can see that these all have numbers on them because we are asking you to identify these different structures. Now, this does not mean that these exact models, for example, will show up on your exam. You can use these certainly to help you study. They're nice because they have numbers that you can attach to IDs. But likely what's going to happen is we will be putting pictures of other models or diagrams on your exam for you. All right, so if we start at the beginning of a nephron, so you can see we have a couple nephrons here that are different types. So this specific type of nephron is more of a cortical nephron because it's further up in the cortex and it's a little bit further away from the medulla. And this nephron is going to be what we call a juxtamedullary nephron, meaning that it's very close to the medulla. And you can see that juxtamedullary nephrons also have very long loops of Henle. All right, and so we can start either of these, both of them have the exact same structures. You can just see that they have slightly different features like the lengths of the loop of Henle and their proximity of the glomerulus to the medulla. But if we focus on this nephron, we can see that we have these arteries, of course, that are branching through the cortex. So we're going to talk about those more specifically in lab. And these arteries have little branches that we are going to call afferent arterioles. And those are going to form this capillary bed where there's a very relatively high blood pressure that's going to push out fluid from the blood. So we have a very high hydrostatic pressure. It's sending out fluid. And you can see that there's kind of this capsule that's surrounding that glomerulus. So this capillary bed, or this network, this ball of capillaries is called the glomerulus. And there's a capsule that surrounds it called the Bowman's capsule. And you can see right here, that's going to be represented by number 1, it looks like. I can't tell, that's a 1 on there. Let's see. This right here is the Bowman's capsule. And the Bowman's capsule is going to collect the fluid that's filtered out from the glomerulus, and you can see it's going to funnel it down into this proximal convoluted tubule. All right, so this is all the proximal convoluted tubule. And the proximal convoluted tubule is where a lot of reabsorption happens. So what gets filtered out of the glomerulus often is going to be things like various ions and amino acids and glucose molecules. But number 2 right here, this proximal convoluted tubule, this is where a lot of reabsorption happens. So a lot of those amino acids and ions get reabsorbed back into the blood, and normally all of the glucose should be reabsorbed as well. So one thing we'll talk about is if you find glucose in the urine, it's because not all of it got reabsorbed at this location, and that's an indication that someone may be diabetic. All right, but there will be more on that. So this is the proximal convoluted tubule, abbreviated PCT. And this will drain the fluid down here. So this is, again, urine's already started to become formed. We've had a lot of important things reabsorbed back into the blood through the PCT. And then the PCT is basically going to enter this section of the tubule that's going to dip down into the medulla. And this whole sort of really long loop we call the loop of Henle. So what I'm tracing right now, this is going to be the descending loop. All right, and then going back up is the ascending loop of Henle, or portion of the loop of Henle. And you can see that ascending loop is going to transition into this other tubule, which is very windy. It's twisting and turning, so this is what we refer to as a convoluted tubule. However, you can see that the first one we called proximal convoluted tubule because it was close and proximal to the glomerulus. This one's a little bit further away, especially if you follow the distance of the tubule. So this, represented by number 5, is the distal convoluted tubule. All right, now there's a special region of cells right here around where you see the letter D, where you're going to find the juxtaglomerular apparatus. So we're going to talk about that more extensively in lecture. All right, but if we follow the distal convoluted tubule, so this is where a lot of secretion happens and a little bit of reabsorption still happens here. So this is where secretion of hydrogen ions and other electrolytes can happen, such as potassium. And we're going to have ions and, like we said, things like potassium and hydrogen, as well as water can also be reabsorbed here. We have the fluid moving through the distal convoluted tubule, and it's entering this really large structure that's labeled number 6, which is going to be this collecting duct. And you can see that there are a lot of branches because many different nephrons are going to drain into a single collecting duct. And then if we quickly go back over here, remember all those collecting ducts that are parallel to each other, those all make up these lines that you see in those renal pyramids. All right, and if we go over to this juxtamedullary nephron, we can see, again, all the same structures. So the glomerulus, the Bowman's capsule around it, this proximal convoluted tubule, the descending loop of Henle, ascending loop, and that ascending loop transitions into the distal convoluted tubule, and then that will drain into this collecting duct. All right, so this is it for the structures of the urinary system. So again, practice going over this kidney model right here. Try to trace the flow of urine and label the structures along the way. All right, as well as these real kidneys we have over here, especially these really nicely dissected pig kidneys. And then also, again, you can find a little bit of information and identify structures on these sheep kidneys as well. You can, again, see the medulla versus the cortex, and you can see the pyramids very well as the papilla, and things like the renal pelvis and the ureter. And again, this is just another pig kidney. This one, again, is a little bit older, but it's stained orange nicely so that you can visualize some of the minor and major calyces. All right, so again, use your documents that are available on Moodle. Look at the PowerPoints that are also available on Moodle to help you understand not only where you can find these outside of this video, but also so you can understand the function of all of these structures. All right, and again, as usual, please let me know if you have any questions. You can feel free to contact me during my online office hours as well as your TAs, and we'd be glad to help you.